Dan Ives of Wedbush has this to say: there is one chip in the world fueling the AI revolution, and it's NVIDIA. The AI revolution is heading into its next gear of growth despite the Trump tariff war playing out. Dan joins us now for more. Dan, good morning.
Great to be here.
What did you like most yesterday?
I mean, look, the godfather of AI, Jensen, delivered yet again. And I think if you look demand outstripping supply, we believe 8-1. And despite the China tariffs, I think if you look apples to apples, that would have been a $53 billion number compared to where the street, apples to apples, would have been at $48 billion. I think it just shows there's only one chip fueling this AI revolution. It's Jensen and NVIDIA.
There's a question of whether they'll be allowed to fuel that AI revolution. In other words, if they will be allowed to move into China in the way that they kind of need to longer term in order to maintain that dominance. What about yesterday gave you that confidence, given the fact that there still are some pretty existential risks about their ability to operate in China?
Yeah, I know you'll talk to Navarro after. Look, the reality is that Jensen and NVIDIA are essentially giving away their China business. On a silver platter, Huawei, here's our business. And that's the reality. And I think more and more, there's going to have to be some negotiation where they're enabled behind, right now, back against the wall. They need to have a chip that U.S. sanctioned that they can sell into China. Because otherwise, all you're doing here is you're cutting them off at the knees, and Huawei is getting that market. And that's the reality. And I think that was a shot across the bow last night from Jensen. They're in a position of strength. There's one chip in the world fueling it. They continue to see demand that's, I believe.
In recent years, NVIDIA has been one of the major players in the stock market. This is due to the company's significant contribution to artificial intelligence, AI, a technology that has attracted widespread interest. AI has the potential to transform the world in a similar way to how the internet did a few years ago, and NVIDIA's chips support the training of models that activate AI. Because of this, investors have flocked to NVIDIA's stock and have been paying great attention to anything the company's CEO, Jensen Huang, has to say. These remarks give us some insight into the company's future, as well as that of the industry as a whole. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that the stock will frequently move following an NVIDIA event. We can see from the calendar that one such occasion is quickly approaching. NVIDIA's annual shareholders meeting takes place on June 25th. Before then, should you purchase the stock? You might be surprised to hear what history has to say. Let's start by discussing NVIDIA's most recent significant event, which was the company's May 28th first quarter earnings release. NVIDIA once again dazzled investors with revenue that jumped 69% of almost $44 billion, exceeding analysts' projections. Crucially, the firm also mentioned the continued high demand for its new Blackwell architecture. Since inferencing is the focus of many AI customers, it was a wise decision to develop the platform with that in mind. The thinking process that enables AI to provide answers to challenging queries is called inferencing, and it demands a lot of processing power. During the earnings call, Huang signaled that much more growth was anticipated by saying, "We're off to the races." Although it varied on several trading days, NVIDIA's stock rose during the post-earnings trading session and gained almost 6% in the 2 weeks that followed the release. Let's now think about the next shareholders meeting. The agenda, which was just made public by the corporation, covers a number of topics, including the advisory approval of executive compensation and the election of directors recommended by the board of directors. These don't particularly stand out as factors that will cause the stock to rise or fall, but Huang's remarks regarding the company's future could serve as a trigger. What can we learn from the past regarding NVIDIA's stock performance following a shareholders meeting? According to the graphic, the stock dropped in the days after the meeting last year before rising in the weeks that followed. In 2023, NVIDIA adopted a similar strategy. The stock similarly declined after the meeting in 2022, but it didn't bounce back right away. In fact, NVIDIA's loss from that moment until the end of the year was double digits. Therefore, it may come as a surprise that the stock actually declined following each shareholder meeting, despite NVIDIA's results and overall message being good over the past few years. However, it's crucial to remember that this probably has nothing to do with anything that was spoken or decided at the yearly gathering. Investors respond to fresh or particularly forceful statements from Huang at this stage of NVIDIA's development, but they might not give the stock a boost following a routine event like a shareholder meeting. Let's return to our original query. Is it wise to purchase NVIDIA before June 25th? History demonstrates that there is no reason to jump into the stock in the hopes of seeing huge returns after the shareholder meeting. NVIDIA is still a good investment, though. Because of its dedication to innovation, the corporation has established a dominant position in the market and should continue to do so. Because of this, NVIDIA stock is an excellent addition to any AI portfolio. However, You don't have to buy it right then. You have a good chance of making money in the long run, whether you buy it now or after the conference. So, what implications does this have for NVIDIA's stock? Let's explore that. But first, a big thank you to those of you who've stuck with us this far. Creating these videos takes significant effort and dedication, so if you're enjoying the content, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts on NVIDIA stock in the comments. Your support truly helps us grow. Now, let's get back to the video.
This is sort of a subtle narrative shift. There's been a tone from the administration, both this one as well as the Biden administration, that the way to curtail China's advance is to limit some of the exports of U.S. chips and U.S. technology to the world's second biggest economy. It seemed like Jensen Huang was saying that's not right. They're actually catching up. And if we separate ourselves, we're going to fall behind. How much is that catching on in any kind of policy circles, but also within the tech circles?
Yeah, I mean, as someone like myself, I've spent so much of my career, in China, in Taiwan, throughout Asia. That's unrealistic. That think that China's just going to sit there. I mean, if you put them in a box with 2 toothpicks, seltzer water, and sunglasses, they come out with a chip. So the reality is you don't want to give them fuel. And I think that's what Jensen's talking about. You have some of the best engineers in the world. Right now, for the first time in 30 years, the U.S. is ahead of China when it comes to tech. Don't cut U.S. tech off at the knees. And I think that speaks to NVIDIA, speaks to Apple. And I think those are some of the things that you're hearing across the board that we're seeing in tech. And I think that's some of the damage and the balancing act that you guys see with these tariffs.
Do you think Jensen Huang then is going to have the company develop a chip that is export compliant to go into China?
100%.
But why would he do that if he did that with the H20 and then the United States said you can't sell it?
It speaks to negotiation because it comes down to, like, Jensen also recognizes in the Middle East and the red carpet tour, and the reality is, what's that tour without Jensen? What happens to Jensen? Like, yeah, we're not going to sell in the Middle East. I mean, it just speaks to, like, our biggest chips on the table. It's NVIDIA, it's Apple in terms of broader negotiations.
But why would China want to buy a lesser chip when Jensen Huang is saying himself that Huawei, which is blacklisted by the United States, is quite formidable?
Look, and I think that right now is like they're going to come up, whether it's something like beyond an H200, less than a Blackwell, some sort of converted chip, because they need to stay ahead of Huawei in the China market. And that's why when you look at the reaction here, why tech's going to be up so much, despite even like the trade rule and everything we saw, it's because NVIDIA shows that this AI revolution right now is the ripple effect, but it all starts with NVIDIA.
Don't you think there's some tension brewing here?
100%.
The president doesn't want them selling into China. Jensen Huang's trying to create an argument that they should sell into China. The Wall Street Journal reporting this morning. I'll read this verbatim. Fresh accusations from U.S. lawmakers that the company is too close to China. They've received a letter from a Republican, Senator Jim Banks, a Democrat, Senator Elizabeth Warren, accusing them of being too close to the second largest economy on the planet. How do you actually think this is going to play out?
Look, and remember, it's easy when you're in the beltway in front of a microphone, it's easy to say things, right? The reality of the markets are different. And I think it just comes down to U.S. tech. Part of why U.S. tech's leading China is that you need to have that market open up. And it speaks to the U.S.-China negotiations, why it's so important, not just for names like NVIDIA, but for Apple as well as the hyperscalers.
You say you need to have that market open up. Who's you?
U.S. tech needs that market.
Yes, U.S. tech does. Washington, D.C. disagrees.
And
isn't that the ultimate point of tension? And I would argue who wins out? The person setting the rules, which is Washington, D.C.
And I would, and I think that point in tension has been there for years. But the reality is that by ultimately closing off that market, what you're essentially doing is you're cutting U.S. tech off at the knees, and on a silver platter, you're making China stronger. So it goes to the whole Twilight Zone, however you want to think about it, is that this is all giving China an upper hand. That's what Jensen's saying last night, is like, we're leading. You continue to go down this path, Huawei will continue to narrow the gap.
To build on what John is talking about, there was a feeling that national security concerns would take precedence over profitability, over this idea that the tech giants really were necessarily leading the world. Do you think that that argument has fallen apart and that this administration essentially has put tech giants and their dominance at the forefront, even ahead of national security?
And I think it's I think it speaks in, I think that Middle East trip was a watershed event, because it shows the AI revolution now coming to the Middle East. But what does that mean without NVIDIA, without Amazon, without the hyperscalers?
Also, AI revolution coming to the Middle East with a caveat they need to make sure there are guardrails so that these AI data centers do not have U.S. technology leaking to China.
And to your point, you can't have both. You can't have your cake and eat it too, right? The point is, like, how could you do it with the Middle East, but then China be like, okay, you can't have these chips, but we're going to sell next-gen Blackwell chips to Saudi, UAE, and I think that's part of the issue. Like, John, I think that's part of the issue here is that, like, how do you balance that and talk out of both sides of your mouth? And the reality is, what Jensen's saying is, stop tying our hands behind our back, stop giving this market to Huawei, let us go.
During his tour across Europe this week, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang added curiosity and enthusiasm to every place he went. His message was straightforward. NVIDIA is the firm that can assist Europe in developing its artificial intelligence infrastructure, enabling the continent to use the game-changing technology to take charge of its own future. This week, I traveled to London and Paris to join Huang as he met with French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, journalists, fans, analysts, and gave a keynote address at NVIDIA's GTC event in the French capital. Here are my observations and the main lessons I took away. In the tech industry today, Huang is undoubtedly the biggest star. When he spoke at London Tech Week, the auditorium was packed and the queues were long. The Paris GTC event was also packed. It was similar to attending a sporting event or music concert. Every chair had a GTC Paris t-shirt on the back, and there was even a store selling products. I was most struck by Huang's aura when, following a Q&A session with him and a packed room of attendants, the majority of people waited in line to snap selfies or photos with him. Both Macron and Starmer desired to accompany him on stage. Graphics processing units, GPUs, which are needed to develop and run AI applications, are NVIDIA's main product. Huang, however, has positioned NVIDIA as more than just a manufacturer of chips. He characterized NVIDIA as an infrastructure company during the week. AI should be viewed as infrastructure, just like electricity, he added. He made the case to all nations that NVIDIA might be the business to assist them in developing that infrastructure. Huang stated during a lecture at the Viva Tech conference in Paris on Wednesday that, "We think Europe needs to come together and build capacity that is joint in order to compete, in order to build a meaningful ecosystem." To stay informed about the latest developments from NVIDIA and the ever-changing stock market, consider subscribing to our investing tutorial channel. We provide daily updates on significant market shifts and key catalysts, so hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss crucial information. We'd love to hear your thoughts on NVIDIA stock, so please share your opinions in the comments below. Now let's dive into today's video.
Deepwater owns NVIDIA stocks. Gene, it was good, just not good enough.
Yeah, I would actually say it was great, but not extraordinary. And that's really what this needs to be. And when you think about extraordinary, you got to beat the whisper on what the raise is. And so the whisper was that they're going to raise by a couple billion. They raised by $1 billion for April. As however you said in the setup, is the margin guidance. They talked about that being a couple percentage below what the street was at, 1% specifically, at 71% versus 72. And when you have a company like this that, of course, expectations are so high, I think in any normal environment would be down. When you talk about margin pressure, I think it's justification for the stock to probably trade lower on the first trading tomorrow morning U.S. time. I expect it probably to be down, my guess is probably around 5%, because I think that margin really stung. And it was interesting to look at the stock in the after hours trading. It was up a couple percent up until a few minutes to the last question on the call. And the question was related to tariffs, and specifically is, can you get that ramp in margins? Because I mentioned the negative commentary about April margins. They also said that margins would ramp in the back half of the year, back to the mid 70%. So it goes basically go from 70% to 75%. And can you achieve that with the tariffs situation getting more intense? And the answer was, we don't know. It's a fluid environment, and it's not baked into our guidance. And so you quickly saw the stock drop a couple percent, and it's kind of faded since then. And so what that tells us, that stock reaction, looking at it in the aftermarket, it really gives insight to what investors are thinking. And what they're thinking, the central question they're asking right now is, can these margins ramp in the back half of the year? And I think that was a little bit.
This week saw the announcement of one of the biggest collaborations. NVIDIA and French firm Mistral will use the latter's GPUs to create a so-called AI cloud. Huang spoke a lot during the week about sovereign AI, the concept of building data centers within a country's borders that services its population rather than relying on servers located overseas. This has been a significant topic among European businesses and policymakers. Regarding their potential in the AI sector, Huang also praised the United Kingdom, France, and Europe in general. Huang chose to provide a tour of NVIDIA's booth on Thursday, and I was able to speak with him briefly on CNBC's Squawk Box Europe. China was one of the main subjects of that conversation. Due to U.S. export restrictions, NVIDIA has been unable to sell its most sophisticated processors to China, and even less advanced semiconductors are being barred. NVIDIA suffered a $4.5 billion loss on unsold inventories in its most recent quarter's statistics. I questioned Huang about China's advancements in AI chips, specifically bringing up Huawei, the Chinese tech behemoth attempting to produce semiconductors to compete with NVIDIA. According to Huang, Huawei lags behind NVIDIA by a generation. However, Huawei can simply employ more chips to get objectives because China has a lot of energy. Huang stated that Huawei has China covered and everyone else covered if the United States chooses not to participate in China. Huang is also worried about the geopolitical significance of American businesses being unable to enter China. The fact that AI developers worldwide build upon the American technological stack is even more crucial, Huang stated. Just speculating a little, Huang envisions a future in which Chinese AI technology develops. Some nations might choose to work with Chinese businesses rather than American ones to develop their AI infrastructure. Chinese businesses may therefore have an opportunity to compete in the AI race as a result. Huang frequently discusses the future at public engagements. I questioned him about some of the technologies he believes will thrive, such as robots and autonomous vehicles, which NVIDIA's products can power. According to Huang, this will be the decade of robotics and driverless cars. Don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your input helps create a more knowledgeable community where we can all learn and grow together in the world of investing. Stay up to date with the latest market trends, insights, and key updates by subscribing to Investing Tutorial. We're here to help you make smarter investment decisions and stay ahead of the curve.